What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through how you guys can save your fantasy football seasons. So hopefully, everyone watching my videos has gotten off to a great start. You have a great record, but I'm sure some of you guys out there have had some tough luck. Maybe the draft didn't go your way, and you're sitting here with a rough record, whether it's 0-5, 1-4, 2-3, or maybe you're on, playing in multiple leagues, and you've got some great teams, some other teams that aren't doing so well. This video is just going to go through some kind of steps on how you guys can turn those teams around and still give yourself a shot to bring home that fantasy football championship. If you guys enjoy the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But the first step that we're going to go through is just having an unbiased evaluation of your team, because just because you have a rough record through the first 5 weeks, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a bad team or need to make some crazy changes. So the first thing I would look at to kind of determine that would just be your points scored. This could also be like referred to as your points for. If you're in the top half of your league in terms of points scored, but you still have a rough record, you've probably just been unlucky, right? You might be putting up a lot of points in losses where you're just unlucky and the other guy you're playing against has a ton of points. This happens, there's probably one or two players in your league who may have a losing record, but they're going to be in the top half in terms of points for. If that's the case, you're probably not going to have to make any crazy moves because your team is performing well. You just need some of that luck to kind of balance out over the entire season. Now, if you're looking at that points for and you're in the bottom half, then the record is probably reasonable and you may want to consider making some moves. The other thing I would look at in your team evaluation would just be looking at the injuries your team has had. So if you're rostering guys like Austin Eckler or Saquon Barkley, it probably makes sense for you to have struggled through the first 5 weeks, right? Like if you're missing out on your best or second best player, that's going to hurt your lineup and you're going to be at a disadvantage compared to your league mates. So if you're getting those players back, hopefully this week in week 6, then you also probably could be fine moving forward and you're not going to need to make any crazy drastic moves. Now, the other types of injuries would be some valuable players who are out for the season. So guys like J.K. Dobbins, Mike Williams, you may need to go out and make some moves because those players aren't going to come back to save you. Those guys are done for the year, so you're going to have to make some moves moving forward. So if you're in a spot where you have low points for, you're not putting up a ton of points week to week, and then you're not getting some different injured players back in your lineup, then this video is probably going to help you guys go out and kind of turn over your team a little bit here. Now, the next thing I would pay attention to would be understanding your league playoff settings, because every league is going to handle the playoff seeding, how many teams make it. It's going to be different in every single league. So, for example, if only 4 teams are making it to the playoffs compared to 8, your strategy is going to change. Because if you've gotten off to a slow start and there's a low number of teams making the playoffs, you have to be very, very focused on turning this thing around in the short term. On the other hand, if you're in a 10-team league and you have 8 teams make the playoffs, you're not really in a super urgent mode to trade every injured player you have and completely flip your roster around, because there's probably going to be a few other teams that are struggling and you don't necessarily need to kind of mortgage your long-term upside in the short term, because you could still squeak in the 7 seed, the 8 seed, just based on how those playoffs are set up. So very important to understand that. You don't want to go out and sell low on all these injured players if you could actually end up using them in the playoffs long term without having to have a huge turnaround to make those playoffs. Now, once you understand your kind of team setup and your playoff settings, this is where you'd consider selling off of some injured players. So if you're currently a long shot to make the playoffs, like you're in a 12-team league, 4-6 teams make it, but you're sitting there 0-5, 1-4, holding production on players who are injured for multiple weeks or on the injured reserve, it's just not going to help you. You're just going to end up not making the playoffs with those players sitting on your bench or sitting on IR. And I know it's probably going to be painful to go out and start to trade guys like Justin Jefferson or Devon Achane, James Conner, right? These are all players who are going to be going on IR. In certain situations, it just kind of has to be done if you do want a chance to kind of squeak into the playoffs. So the teams that I'd be looking to trade these players to, right, if you're going to be selling an injured Jefferson or an injured Devon Achane, you should be trying to sell those players to the top contenders in your league, because a 5-0 team is going to be much more likely to give you the best return for these injured players, because they can lose the next couple of weeks with these injured guys on their bench, because they've already set up that nice, top record where they can sacrifice a few weeks, but they're still going to have a great shot to make the playoffs. And when they do get into the playoffs, they're now going to have the upside of the injured player that you just traded to them. It's kind of just like a mutually beneficial deal where you're getting a short-term asset or even someone throughout the season, but you're downgrading overall to get someone to give you instant points. They're going to be getting a higher upside player in the long run. And you do want to make sure you're still getting a difference maker for these players, right? If you're trading Justin Jefferson and you're only getting back a fringe wide receiver 2, that's not going to do anything for you. At that point, you may as well just hold on to Jefferson and hope everyone pops off. You want to be bringing someone in who's actually going to help you win games in the short term and can kind of be a game changer for you. Obviously, you're not going to be getting back like a Cooper Kupp or a Tyreek Hill for an injured Justin Jefferson, but I think you should still be targeting someone as like a back-end wide receiver 1, because I do think that would be a fair trade, for one of those top teams. Because it's just going to be a win for both sides. For a guy like Achane, you'd probably be looking at like a high to mid-tier running back 2, because a healthy Achane is a locked-in RB1, so you're still downgrading, but you're getting someone who could be an impact player in your lineup. Now, shifting away from trades, we're going to be looking at the waiver wire here, and you should be looking at upside waiver wire ads. So if you're sitting here today with a rough record, there's a decent chance you're just lacking like talent and production compared to the other teams in your league. That would make sense for why you're in a spot where you have a losing record, whether that was just a rough draft or the injuries like we talked about. You're probably just outmatched in the talent department. So picking up the right kind of players can help you kind of bridge that gap between where you're at now and some of those top league mates in your league, and you can be getting some of those players off the waiver wire. So the types of players that I'd be looking to roster would be handcuff running backs and young wide receivers, or roster on your bench or just go out and pick up off the waiver wire. So handcuff running backs, young upside wide receivers. There are going to be guys that you may roster like the Curtis Samuel types at wide receiver, and it may look nice on your bench when they're giving you 10, 11 points. But are those guys ever really going to crack your lineup? Are those going to be the players that really elevate your team and kind of get you out of your rut? Personally, I don't think so. If you pick up a handcuff, they may be giving you nothing week to week, but if they're sitting on your bench, it really doesn't matter, right? 8 points, 9 points on your bench compared to 0, 1, 2, it doesn't matter because all those players are sitting on your bench. But those handcuff running backs, those are players who can turn into solid running back 2s, in some cases even running back 1s with just one injury, right? You have Zach Charbonnet on waivers. Kenneth Walker goes down. Zach Charbonnet is probably a weekly running back 1 in your lineup that just appeared out of nowhere. You didn't have to give anything up for it. He was just free off the waiver wire. There are obviously going to be less rostered handcuffs. Guys like Tank Bigsby, Rico Dowdle. Those are players who probably aren't super heavily rostered, but an injury to ETN, an injury to Tony Pollard could open up significant workloads for players like that. And then also these younger wide receivers. These young guys, they may not be putting up the same production as some of the veterans who are giving you 9, 10, 11 PPR points per game, but that type of production isn't going to help you out in the long run. You got to think about, the past 2 years, a guy like Amon-Ra, Christian Watson, these dudes were wide receiver 1s down the stretch in the last 2 seasons, and they were pretty much free off waivers, right? People were not rostering them. Even if they drafted them, they were releasing them, and then they just go on these huge tears. Those are going to be the players that get you back to relevancy and can really, kind of just bolster the talent on your roster. So handcuff running backs and younger wide receivers, those are just the players that I think are going to be the difference-making waiver wire targets for you guys to go after. And then the final tip here is just going to be to not make moves just because you're frustrated. If you're sitting here with an unfortunate record through 5 games, there's a pretty decent chance that you have a few players on your roster, either through the draft or through trades, who have just wildly underperformed your expectations to start off the season. And some people, I feel like they really like the idea of like just throwing that player away, cutting them, trading them for nothing when they haven't lived up to expectations. But are you dropping or trading that player because you're upset, or are you actually getting like a solid return? I think a lot of people, they almost treat it like they're a real life GM or a coach and they want to like bench the player, release them, whatever it is. Like every once in a while in my comments, I'll kind of see this, someone threatening to cut a player because they've been on a rough stretch. Funny enough, I saw that a lot with Justin Fields after the first 3 weeks. It was like, oh, Fields is terrible in my lineup. I'm going to cut him. I'm going to trade him for nothing. I got a lot of those comments. Look how that turned out, right? You drafted Justin Fields for a reason. He struggled to start off the season. Then he just balls out the last 2 weeks. And those people are probably feeling pretty rough, right? Because they went out there on waivers, there's going to be no one that could touch the ceiling of Justin Fields that they were looking at off waivers, and now he goes out, balls out, and now your team is in an even rougher spot. So you can make your situation worse by just making like irrational decisions. So that's something I would definitely look out for. I actually saw a recent comment about that with Ramondre. Yes, Ramondre Stevenson has been very disappointing, but are you really going to go out there and find a better player on waivers? Like, is there someone sitting out there on the waiver wire who was a running back one last year and has kind of, decreased his role but could still regain it? Like, I don't think so. Those dudes aren't just sitting out there. It's very possible that at any point the Patriots could just flip back to Ramondre Stevenson being the RB1, and then you're going to be feeling pretty foolish having, just dropped him for no reason. So that's something to also keep in mind here. You can make your situation worse by just overreacting and being frustrated. So just to run through those kind of steps again. First off, unbiased team evaluation. Are you really in a rough spot, or have you just been unlucky to start off the season, whether it's short-term injuries or just, kind of getting a tough break in terms of your week-to-week matchups? Then understand your league playoff settings. That's going to change how you operate. Sell off of injured players if you are in a tough spot. They're not going to help you get to the playoffs if you're way on the outside looking in. So get some solid players in return, but you don't want to hold those players just to miss the playoffs. Go after those upside waiver wire ads, handcuff running backs, elite upside younger wide receivers, and then don't just make moves because you are frustrated. Make sure it's actually the smart thing to do. So those are the 5 steps. Hopefully this helped you guys kind of start getting your team back on track. If you have any fantasy questions, you can drop them down below. As always, thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.